I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, something even my own wife didn't know until the day I almost lost her. For 10 years, I was a sorcerer, and what I did to people, to entire families, to sincere Christians, even to pastors, had nothing to do with incantations spoken aloud or visible rituals. No, what I did was much more insidious, much more devastating, and above all, much harder to detect. I placed objects in houses, 4 objects to be precise, 4 types of objects that I and other members of my family used to enter Christian homes unseen, unsuspecting, and without anyone understanding why their lives were crumbling around them. And today, for the first time in my life, I'm going to reveal to you exactly what those 4 objects were, how we prepared them, how we brought them into homes, and most importantly, how to identify them if one of them is in your house right now. But before I go into detail, I must explain how it all began for me, because I wasn't born a sorcerer. At least, that's what I believed for a long time. My name was changed to protect me, my village too. But what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true, every word, every detail. I come from Kongsamba, a town in Cameroon nestled in the mountains, where the air is fresh and coffee plantations stretch as far as the eye can see. I grew up in a family that, on the surface, was like all the other families in our neighborhood. My father worked on a coffee plantation owned by a Frenchman who never came. My mother sold bean fritters and fish stock at the central market in Kongsamba. There were 5 of us children. I was the third, and like all the families in the neighborhood, we went to church every Sunday morning. My father always wore his gray suit, the only one he owned, with a blue tie. My mother wore her Sunday best and her white headscarf, and we children walked in a line behind them on the red dirt path that led to the church. Everything seemed normal, everything seemed ordinary, but what I didn't know, what no one had ever told me, was that behind this facade of normality, behind the baths and the Sunday prayers, there was something very ancient and very dark that had been operating in my family for at least 5 generations, 5 generations of pacts, 5 generations of transmission, 5 generations of nighttime meetings that no one ever spoke of in the light of day. I remember, as a child, sometimes waking up at night to find the house empty. My parents were no longer in their room, my brothers and sisters were asleep, but my parents had vanished. In the morning, when I asked my mother where she had been, she would tell me, "I went to the toilet outside," that's all, and I believed her, because when you're a child, you believe your mother, you don't ask questions, you don't suspect that the woman who prepares your cornmeal porridge in the morning is the same woman who, a few hours earlier, was participating in a gathering in the world of darkness. The night everything changed. I was 16 years old. It was during the rainy season. I remember the rain pounding on the tin roof with such force that we could barely hear each other speak. I went to bed as usual, like every night, on my mat in the room I shared with my 2 brothers, but in the middle of the night, something changed. It wasn't a normal awakening, nor was it a simple dream. It was somewhere in between. My body was asleep on the mat, I could see it beneath me. But my mind, it was up and walking. I found myself standing in the middle of a large room I had never seen before. The floor was black, shiny like marble wet from the rain. The walls seemed to be made of smoke, of solidified fog, and there was a smell I can only describe as earth after a storm mixed with something metallic, like blood. Dozens of people were sitting in a circle on dark wooden stools, and when my eyes adjusted to the light, or rather, the lack thereof, I recognized them. They were members of my family, my paternal uncle, Mbida, the one who almost never spoke during family meals, my aunt, Esther, my father's sister, the one who lived in Yaoundé and only came to see us once a year, cousins, some of whom lived in villages I had only visited once in my life, and in the center of the circle, sitting on a stool taller than the others, was my grandfather, who had died 3 years earlier, my grandfather, whose funeral I had attended, my grandfather, whom I had seen lowered into the grave. My grandfather stood up slowly. He looked at me with eyes unlike any I had ever seen. His living eyes had been gentle, tired, almost sad, but these eyes shone with an intensity I had never seen in a human being. He walked toward me without a sound, His feet didn't touch the ground, and he placed both hands on my head, hands as cold as stone. I felt an intense, almost burning heat descend from my head along my spine, then spread through my arms, then, in my hands. Each finger burned as if plunged into fire, and my grandfather said a single word, a word I had never heard before, a word in a language that was neither French, nor Douala, nor Bamalik, nor any language I knew, just one word, and everything went black. When I woke up the next morning, I had marks on my palms, not wounds visible to the naked eye. When I looked at my hands, they usually seemed the same as the day before, but when I closed my eyes and looked at my hands with a different kind of vision, an inner vision I didn't know I possessed, I saw symbols, circular patterns that hadn't been there before, like invisible tattoos etched beneath the surface of my skin. From that night on, things changed. I began to see things that others didn't see, shadows around some people, lights around others, and above all, I began to hear voices, not frightening or demonic voices like in movies, no, calm, almost reassuring voices that told me things about the people around me, secrets, weaknesses, open doors. For 6 years, I lived with these abilities without truly understanding what they were. I thought I might be a prophet, that God had given me a gift. That's what my aunt told me when I spoke to her about it. She said it was a family heirloom, something spiritual, something powerful. She never used the word witchcraft, she used the word tradition. It was at 22 that I was fully integrated into what my family called the meetings, the nighttime gatherings, assemblies held in the spirit world where each family member received missions, specific objectives, specific targets, and that's where I discovered the truth about what had happened to me at 16. My grandfather, before he died, had performed a transfer ritual. He had chosen to pass on his powers and his position in the family assembly to me. I had never had a choice, no one had asked my opinion, and now it was too late to back out. The first mission I was given concerned a neighbor, a man who had just started a small motorcycle parts business and was beginning to prosper. His customers came from all over town. He had even hired 2 employees, and in our neighborhood, when someone starts to prosper, it doesn't go unnoticed, especially at the nightly assembly. The way the assignments were distributed was very organized. It wasn't chaotic at all, as one might imagine. It was almost administrative. Each nightly meeting had an agenda. My grandfather, or rather his spirit, because he was physically dead but spiritually present, presided over the assembly. The members presented reports on the ongoing assignments, who was being targeted, what the results were, what obstacles had been encountered, and then new assignments were given. When my name was called that first time, when I was told that the neighbor with the motorcycle business had to be stopped, I asked why, and the answer shocked me even then. My uncle Mbida said it was because he had started tithing to his church, and since he started tithing, his business had grown. If his business continued to grow, others would start tithing too, and if the Christians in this neighborhood start tithing massively, our power in this area will diminish. It was at that moment that I understood the magnitude of what was at stake. These weren't random attacks, it was a territorial war. Every neighborhood, every city, every geographic area was contested territory, and the family assembly's mission was to maintain control over our area. This meant blocking the prosperity of active Christians, neutralizing powerful intercessors, and preventing the growth of local churches, and it was there that I first learned about the technique of objects. My uncle took me aside after the meeting and said, "Listen, I'm going to teach you something your grandfather taught me 30 years ago. It's the most effective technique we have, more effective than night attacks, more effective than remote spells, more effective than anything you've seen before, and that technique is booby-trapped objects." He explained the basic principle to me. In the spirit world, physical objects can serve as a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. When an object is properly prepared, it becomes a doorway through which spirits can enter a physical space and remain there undetected. The diabolical beauty of this technique, he told me, is that no one suspects an object. People suspect people, they suspect neighbors, colleagues, visible enemies, but no one suspects the mirror in the bedroom or the vase on the shelf, and that's precisely why it works so well. There were 4 categories of objects we used, each category had a specific function, and I spent months learning how to prepare each type. Preparing each object was a meticulous process, almost scientific in its precision. Every step had to be followed, every incantation had to be spoken in the correct order, one word missing, one gesture forgotten, and the object wouldn't work. It was as rigorous as a chemistry recipe. Before I reveal what those 4 objects were and how we used them, I need to pause. I know some of you are feeling something right now as you listen to these words. Perhaps your heart is pounding, perhaps something inside you is telling you that this testimony is directly about you, and I'll tell you why, because what I just described, this technique of using booby-trapped objects, is exactly what might be happening in your home right now. You're wondering why, despite your prayers, despite your faithfulness, despite your games, things aren't changing. Why is your marriage under constant strain? Why are your finances stagnating or declining? Why are your children restless, sick, or rebellious? Why do you feel heavy, exhausted, stuck? You pray, and nothing changes? It's not your weakness, it's not a lack of faith, it's not because God doesn't hear you. It's because there's something in your home, an object, perhaps a gift someone gave you, perhaps a piece of furniture you bought from a stranger, perhaps a perfume you were given, and this object functions like an open door. As long as this door is open, your prayers are intercepted, your blessings are diverted, and spirits come and go freely, and this influence is still active right now, even as you listen to these words. It doesn't stop because you pray. It doesn't stop because you play, it stops when you identify the door and close it, and these same techniques I use to infiltrate homes and block finances are the same techniques used against marriages, against children, against health, the same system, the same doors, the same strategy, only the object changes, only the target changes, but the mechanism is identical. That's why I want to talk to you about destroying effects. The 21-day deliverance protocol. It's a complete system designed to identify and close every spiritual door in your life. It consists of 20 days of focused prayer, 20 days of strategic declaration, and 21 days of systematic deliverance from the 7 main attacks that Christians most often faced. When I was in darkness, this protocol was developed by believers who understand spiritual warfare at the deepest level of their being. I followed it myself after my deliverance. It was an integral part of my healing process, teaching me to recognize and close all the doors I had opened, both personally and for others. The link is in the description. Don't wait. The enemy doesn't wait. Why should you? Now, if you have experienced inexplicable symptoms in your home, if conflicts arise for no reason, if your finances stagnate despite your efforts, if your sleep is disturbed by strange dreams or night paralysis, I invite you to participate in a powerful action right now. Write in the comments, "In the name of Jesus, I break every assignment related to the booby-trapped objects in my home and I close every doorway to darkness." Don't miss this step. Participating in a public declaration is powerful. When you name the mission and break it with other believers, you are waging spiritual warfare. And I can tell you from experience that when hundreds of believers participate and bring about victory together, the missions are broken. So participate now. Write in the name of Jesus, I break every assignment related to the booby-trapped objects in my home and I close every doorway to darkness. Now, let me go back to my story and reveal to you exactly what those 4 objects were, because what I'm about to tell you can change your life today. The first object was the mirror. In the family assembly, we call the mirror the surveillance portal. An enchanted mirror isn't just any mirror, it's a mirror that has been richly prepared before being given or placed in the target's home. The preparation process took 3 nights, 3 nights during which the mirror was exposed to specific incantations, 3 nights during which a spirit of surveillance was attached to it, and once that mirror entered someone's home, that spirit could see everything that happened inside that home. Everything, the conversations, the prayers, the intimate moments, the arguments, the the weaknesses. I remember my first assignment with a mirror. It was a year after my full integration into the congregation. I was asked to target the home of a deacon in our neighborhood. This man's name was, I'm going to use a pseudonym to protect him, I'll call him Brother Thomas. Brother Thomas was a respected man in the neighborhood. He taught catechism to the youth. He organized visits to the sick, and his wife, a woman everyone respectfully called Mama Thomas, was known to be an extraordinarily powerful woman of prayer. It was said in the neighborhood that when Mama Thomas prayed, things moved, the sick healings were happening, situations were resolving. She possessed a spiritual authority that even some pastors envied. The congregation had tried to reach her directly several times, but every spiritual attack launched against her bounced off. Her spiritual shield was too strong. Her prayers created a wall around her house that our spirits couldn't penetrate, so the congregation decided to change its strategy. Instead of attacking from the outside, we would infiltrate from within, and that's where the mirror came in. We chose an intermediary, a neighbor of the deacon, a woman who had nothing to do with witchcraft but was easily influenced. I got closer to this neighbor by offering her small favors. I helped her carry her goods to the market. I lent her son money for school fees. Gradually, she began to trust me, and one day, I gave her a decorative mirror, telling her it was a gift from Mama Thomas. I told her that I wanted to thank her for her prayers. The neighbor found the gesture touching. She brought the mirror to Mrs. Thomas's house. It was a beautiful mirror with a carved wooden frame, floral motifs, something elegant. Mother Thomas hung it in her bedroom, right across from the marital bed. From that moment on, we could see everything, absolutely everything. I'm going to tell you something that might terrify you, but it's absolutely true. When an enchanted mirror is in a room, the spirits assigned to that mirror see everything that happens in that room. They hear every conversation. They observe every moment of prayer. They note every weakness. They identify every point of entry. We knew exactly when Mother Thomas prayed. We knew when she was tired. We knew when she had doubts. We knew the topics of argument between her and her husband. We knew the moments of vulnerability, and that's when we started to attack, not dramatically, no, surgically, subtly, precisely. A small marital conflict triggered at the exact moment we knew both spouses were tired and vulnerable. A misunderstanding arose on a subject we had identified as sensitive through our observations. Her husband was coming home late without explanation because we had sent a spirit of confusion on his way home from work. A child was starting to get sick, first a cold that wouldn't go away, then nighttime fevers, then nightmares. Little by little, month after month, we dismantled this family from within, and Mama Thomas, this powerful woman of prayer, didn't understand what was happening. She prayed even harder. She spent entire nights on her knees, but her prayers no longer reached the ceiling because the mirror in her room was a wide open door, and everything she said in her prayers, we heard, every request, every intercession, every cry from the heart, and we used this information against her. If she prayed about her husband's finances, we knew we had to intensify the financial attack. If she prayed about her child's health, we knew our strategy was working, and we continued. If you have a mirror in your home that you didn't buy yourself, a mirror that was given to you, especially by someone whose spiritual life you're not entirely sure about, you must be vigilant. I'm not saying that all mirrors are traps, but I am saying that the mirror is one of the most commonly used tools because it's the easiest to justify. Everyone needs a mirror, no one is suspicious of a mirror. Now, the second object, and this one might shock you because it's even more common than the mirror, is perfume, fragrance. In the assembly, we called perfume the invisible breath. A ritually prepared perfume works differently from a mirror. The mirror is a fixed portal, it stays in the house and watches over it. Perfume, on the other hand, travels with a person, it clings to their body, it enters their intimacy, and it attracts specific spirits. There were two types of perfumes that we prepared. The first type attracted spirits of lust. The person wearing this perfume began to have impure thoughts, inexplicable desires, recurring sexual dreams, and gradually drifted away from their prayer life because they felt unworthy, they felt dirty, they thought it was their own weakness, but it wasn't them, it was the perfume. The second type of perfume attracted spirits of confusion. The person wearing it began to make bad decisions that seemed logical. They seemed promising at the time, but they always led to disaster. Investments failed, relationships deteriorated, opportunities slipped through his fingers at the last minute, and all because of a bottle of perfume someone had given him with a smile. I remember one specific case, a Christian businessman from Douala who had a thriving cocoa export business. He was targeted by our congregation because his prosperity inspired other Christians in the neighborhood. His success influenced others, and the congregation didn't want that, so we used a woman who became close to his secretary. They became friends, and one day this woman gave the secretary a bottle of perfume, saying it was a very expensive one imported from Paris, a gift between friends. The secretary started wearing this perfume to the office every day. Within 3 months, this man's business collapsed, not because of a single event, but because of dozens of small mistakes, a poorly signed contract, a supplier who vanished, a loyal client who left without explanation. The man lost 20% of his revenue in less than a year and he couldn't understand why. He gambled, he prayed, he held vigils, but the perfume was still there on his secretary's body in his office every day. I'll tell you about the third object in a moment. But before that, I need to tell you something important about how these objects work together, because what makes this technique so devastating isn't a single isolated object, it's the combination. Often, we would place 2 or 3 objects in the same house, and each object had a different role. The mirror monitored, the perfume confused, and the third object, the one I'm going to tell you about now, transferred the influence directly onto the person's body, their fabric, their clothing. We called this the contact bond. The principle was simple and terribly effective. A piece of fabric or clothing that had been ritually prepared, once it touched the skin of the targeted person, directly transferred the influence. It was a transfer through physical contact, and the diabolical beauty of this technique was that a garment touched the entire body. It enveloped the person, accompanied them everywhere, and the influence took root not in the house, but within the person themselves. The types of fabrics we used varied depending on the mission. To block a marriage, we prepared a loincloth that a single woman received as a gift. The preparation process was specific. The loincloth had to be soaked in a solution for 3 nights, a solution made from river water collected at midnight, mixed with powders whose details I won't go into. Then, incantations were recited over the fabric while it dried, and once given as a gift, as soon as the woman wore it and the fabric touched her skin, a mystical marriage was formed in the spiritual realm. A spirit of Mary took possession of her love life. All the men who showed interest in her ended up leaving without reason. Some felt a sudden and inexplicable repulsion, others became aggressive overnight, still others simply disappeared, without a word, as if they had forgotten she existed, and the woman remained alone year after year, wondering what was wrong with her. Some women wore her loincloths for years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 15, wondering why they couldn't find anyone, why every relationship failed, and love seemed to elude them. The answer was literally on their bodies, a piece of fabric. To block health, we would prepare an article of clothing, often a hat or scarf, sometimes underwear when we could pass it off as a gift. The type of effect depended on the area of the body the fabric touched. A hat caused chronic headaches, dizziness, and mental confusion. A scarf caused throat problems, difficulty breathing, sometimes a feeling of suffocation at night. Underwear could cause abdominal pain, fertility problems, and genital illnesses that doctors couldn't diagnose. Doctors performed extensive examinations, scans, and blood tests and found nothing, absolutely nothing abnormal, because there was nothing medical. It was spiritual and had become attached to the fabric the person wore, sometimes every day. A case I will never forget, a 28-year-old Christian woman, active in her church, sang in the choir and participated in all the prayer groups. Her mother, who was part of our congregation without the daughter's knowledge, asked me to prepare a loincloth for her daughter. The mission was to prevent her marriage. Why would a mother do that to her own daughter? You might ask. Because in the world of witchcraft, there is no such thing as family love. There are pacts, There are debts, there are obligations, and this mother owed the congregation. The price of that debt was her daughter's marriage. I prepared the loincloth, the mother gave it to her daughter for Christmas. The daughter was overjoyed. She wore that loincloth almost every Sunday to go to church, and for 7 years, 7 long years, no man could stay in her life for more than a few weeks. She wept, she prayed, she gambled, she asked pastors to pray for her. But no one ever thought to examine the loincloth she was wearing. That kind of suffering, when I think back on it today, breaks my heart because it was me. I did that, and I have to live with that reality for the rest of my life. Now, the fourth and final object, and this one is perhaps the most dangerous of all because it's permanent. The fourth object is the decorative object, the statuette, the vase, the sculpture, what we called the anchor point. The first 3 objects, the mirror, the perfume, and the fabric, each have their limitations. The mirror can be moved or broken. The perfume eventually runs out, the fabric can wear out or be thrown away, but the decorative object remains. It stays on the shelf, it stays on the living room table, it stays in the corner of the bedroom, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, and all the while, it functioned as a permanent anchor point for the spirits in that house. The process of preparing a decorative object was the longest and the most complex of all. It required 7 nights of ritual, 7 consecutive nights during which the object was buried in a specific location, different each night, depending on the type of imprint one wanted to attach to it. The first night, it was at a crossroads, the second near a stream, the third in a cemetery, and so on. Each location added a layer of imprint, and by the end of the 7 nights, the object was a concentrated source of destructive power locked within something that resembled a simple decoration. Once placed in the house, this object became the headquarters of the spirits assigned to that family. The spirits didn't come from outside with each attack, no, they resided within the object, they were there permanently, and from that place, they could influence every aspect of that family's life: sleep, thoughts, emotions, relationships, finances, health, everything. I remember a pastor in Douala, a sincere man of God, a man who prayed for hours every day, who fasted regularly, and whose church was growing. The congregation decided he had to be stopped, and I was entrusted with the task. I had a small ceramic vase made, a simple, pretty object that looked like it came from a craft market. I asked a member of the church, someone who knew nothing about witchcraft but who owed me a favor, to give it to the pastor as a gift for the new church office. The pastor gladly accepted it. He placed it on his desk right next to his Bible. The first effects appeared after 2 weeks. The pastor began to feel tired during his sermons. These sermons, which normally lasted an hour and a half, were reduced to 45 minutes. They could no longer concentrate. Then the conflicts began in the church. Elders argued, parishioners left, rumors circulated. In 6 months, his church had lost half its members, and the pastor was on the verge of a breakdown. The most terrible thing was that this pastor brought in other men of God to pray in his church. They prayed fervently, they held deliverance sessions, but no one ever thought to examine the small vase on his desk. No one considered that the source of the problem was a physical object, and as long as the vase was there, the prayers were like water poured into a leaky bucket. They had no lasting effect. This went on for almost 3 years. 3 years of suffering for this man of God. 3 years during which I watched from the spiritual realm the destruction I had caused, and I felt nothing, absolutely nothing, because in the world of witchcraft, your heart is closed, your conscience is asleep. You do evil like a worker does their job, methodically, professionally, without emotion. Now, I must tell you how we chose our targets because it's something most people don't understand. We didn't target just anyone, we had very specific criteria. First, we targeted Christians who were beginning to prosper, not Christians who had been rich for a long time. No, those who were starting to rise, those whose situation was visibly changing. The man who had just opened a new business and whose customers were flocking in. The woman who had just started a sewing business and already had 3 apprentices. The recent graduate who had just found a good job and was sending money back to their family. These are the ones who inspire others. These are the ones who make the people around them say that God is faithful, and that's exactly what the enemy doesn't want, because every testimony of prosperity is a weapon against the kingdom of darkness. Every person who says, God has blessed me, gives hope to 10 others, and hope is the enemy of the enemy. Secondly, we targeted Christians who prayed with authority, not those who recited memorized prayers without conviction. No, those whose prayers actually disturbed the spiritual world. I'll tell you something many people don't know. In the spiritual world, the prayers of a spirit-filled Christian are visible. They rise like pillars of light, and when a Christian intercedes for their neighborhood, their city, their nation, that light creates a protective perimeter around everyone living in that area. Those Christians were our targets. They were absolute priorities, because if we could neutralize them, if we could extinguish that light, hundreds of people would become vulnerable at the same time. That's why intercessors are always the most attacked. If you're an intercessor and your life seems to be constantly under pressure, it's not by chance, it's because you're effective, and the enemy always targets what is effective. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we targeted Christians whose children showed signs of a ministerial calling, children who, from a young age, displayed a particular spiritual sensitivity. The child who would spontaneously begin to pray in the middle of a meal, the child who told their parents about visions, the child who cried when they saw someone suffering and said, I want to pray for that person. These children were absolute targets. The congregation marked them from birth, if possible, because the enemy understands something that even many Christians don't. The enemy understands the power of potential. He doesn't look at who you are today. He looks at who you could become tomorrow, and if a child has the potential to become a powerful man or woman of God, the enemy prefers to block them now while they are still young rather than wait until they are grown and powerful. Fourth, and this is a point I must mention because it is crucial, we also targeted couples whose marriages were strong, couples who prayed together, couples who raised their children in the faith, couples who were an example to others, because a strong Christian marriage is a fortress. And the enemy cannot stand fortresses. He wants to tear them down, and one of the most effective ways to bring down a marriage is to place a trap in the marital bedroom, a mirror, perfume on the nightstand, an article of clothing, something that will create an invisible distance between the spouses, something that will sow confusion, mistrust, irritability, and the two spouses will never understand why they argue over insignificant things. They'll think it's fatigue, they'll think it's work stress. They'll never consider that it's the small decorative object on their bedroom shelf. And now, I must tell you what pulled me out of all this. Because for 17 years, I did these things without ever questioning what I was doing. I destroyed dozens of homes, I broke up marriages, I blocked finances, I caused illnesses, and I slept peacefully every night until the day the mission caught up with me personally. My wife, Amandine, she knew nothing of my secret life. She knew me as a businessman, a quiet man, a little mysterious perhaps, but a good husband and a good father. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and our life seemed normal. But in the family assembly, there was one rule no one could break. Every 7 years, each member had to make a significant sacrifice, a costly sacrifice, not money, no, something far more precious. The 7th year of my second cycle was approaching, and the assembly decided that the sacrifice would be my wife's health. I refused. For the first time in my life, I said, clear's throat, no, and that's when I realized how trapped I was. Because one member's refusal doesn't stop the congregation finds another way, and they used the same technique against my own wife that I had used against hundreds of people, a decorative object, a